Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. Our drill was a monster of Soviet engineering, built to chew through rock and ice. Miles into the Siberian wasteland, it stopped. The sensors showed an object, smooth and vast. We assumed it was a strange geological formation, but when we sent down microphones, we heard it. Not a radio signal, not an engine. A sound, a slow rhythmic pulse from within the object, like a colossal heart sleeping in the ice. Then the pulses started getting faster the closer we drilled. My name is Dmitry Volkov, and I was 26 when they assigned me to Survey Team 7 in the Kolyma region. It was November 1987, 3 years before everything would fall apart, but we didn't know that yet. All we knew was the permafrost held secrets and Moscow wanted them extracted. The expedition had been drilling for 6 weeks when we hit the anomaly. Our team consisted of myself as lead geologist, Viktor Petrov, a barrel-chested drill operator who could smoke through a pack of Belomorkanals before lunch, and Alexei Kozlov, our communications specialist who'd rather tinker with radio equipment than talk to actual people. We'd been dropped into this frozen hellscape to search for mineral deposits, part of some grand 5-year plan that would probably be forgotten by spring. The drilling station sat like a metal tumor on the endless white landscape, 40 kilometers northeast of Susuman. Generator exhaust mixed with cigarette smoke in the perpetual twilight, creating a haze that made everything look underwater. We'd gotten used to the isolation, the way conversations died after the 3rd week, the way Victor's snoring became the only reliable timekeeper in our cramped quarters. But when that drill bit reached 847 meters and suddenly ground to a halt, everything changed. Victor cursed in 3 languages, checking readouts that made no sense. The drill hadn't hit rock. The resistance was wrong, too uniform. I'd never seen anything like it in 15 years of geological surveys. The object measured roughly 60 meters in diameter, perfectly smooth, sitting in what should have been solid permafrost, like someone had buried a massive ball bearing. "Dmitry, you need to hear this," Alexei called from his equipment bank, adjusting the gain on our deep-bore microphones. The sound that came through the speakers made my mouth go dry. Slow, rhythmic, organic. Like breathing, but deeper than any lung could produce. Victor stopped mid-curse, his cigarette hanging from his lip, as we listened to something that had been sleeping beneath the ice for God knows how long. That's when the pulses started accelerating. Each time Victor engaged the drill, the rhythm quickened, not responding to vibration or heat, responding to us, to our approach, as if whatever was down there was waking up. Moscow had sent us to find copper deposits. Instead, we'd found something that was very much alive, buried deeper than any known civilization, in permafrost that hadn't thawed since before humans walked the earth. And it was starting to wake up. Victor killed the drill motor and the sudden silence felt wrong. The rhythmic pulse continued from below, now fast enough that I could count the beats, roughly 80 per minute. Human resting heart rate. "We need to radio Susuman," I said, reaching for the communication equipment. "Wait." Alexei grabbed my wrist. His face had gone pale. "Listen to that frequency." He'd been monitoring radio chatter during the drilling operation, standard protocol to maintain contact with the regional base. But now the speakers crackled with something else, a transmission bleeding through on our emergency channel. The voice was scratchy, distant, speaking in heavily accented Russian. "Survey teams operating in Kolyma Sector 7 through 15. Implement Protocol 11 immediately upon discovery of subsurface metallic anomalies. Do not attempt excavation. Do not establish direct contact. Maintain minimum safe distance of 200 meters. Victor spat tobacco juice into an empty can. "Protocol 11? I've been drilling for 12 years, never heard of any Protocol 11. I hadn't either. Soviet mining operations had protocols for everything. Gas leaks, equipment failure, worker injuries. But this transmission felt different. Official, yet somehow unofficial. Like someone broadcasting instructions they weren't supposed to give. "When was that sent?" I asked Alexei. He checked his logs, frowning. "It's been repeating every 4 hours for the past 3 days. But here's the weird part. It's not coming from Susuman. Signal origin is somewhere southeast, Maybe Magadan. Magadan, regional headquarters where decisions got made by men in warm offices who'd never held a drill bit. If they were broadcasting protocols we'd never heard of, it meant they knew something we didn't. The pulse from below quickened again, 90 beats per minute now. Victor lit another cigarette, the flame illuminating his weathered face in the perpetual dusk. So what? We just pack up and leave? Tell Moscow we found something interesting but couldn't touch it because of some mystery protocol. That's when Alexei's radio crackled again, different voice this time. Additional instruction for Protocol 11 implementation. If anomaly shows signs of activity, establish observation post at minimum safe distance. Document all changes in electromagnetic signature. Under no circumstances should personnel remain on site during night cycle. I checked my watch, 3:47 p.m. In Siberian November, night started early and lasted 16 hours. Electromagnetic signature, Alexei muttered, adjusting his equipment. That explains the interference we've been getting. For the past week, our radio communications had been spotty, filled with static that came and went in waves. I'd assumed it was weather-related, but if this thing was generating some kind of electromagnetic field... Victor was already moving, gathering his tools with practiced efficiency. I don't know about you comrades, but I'm not spending the night 200 meters from whatever's making that sound. The pulse quickened again, 100 beats per minute. As we packed our essential equipment, I noticed something else. The drilling site's floodlights, powered by our diesel generator, had started flickering in rhythm with the pulse. Not the irregular flutter of dying bulbs, a steady on-off pattern that matched the beats from below. Alexei, are you seeing this? He looked up from securing his radio gear, following my gaze to the lights. His face went slack. That's not possible. The electrical system isn't connected to anything down there. But the evidence was undeniable. Each pulse from the buried object corresponded to a brief dimming of our lights, as if something was drawing power through the earth itself. Victor shouldered his pack, cigarette dangling from his lips. You know what? Fuck Protocol 11. I want to know what that thing is. Victor, we need to follow... Follow what? Instructions from ghosts on the radio? We're scientists, Dmitri. We're supposed to investigate anomalies, not run away from them. The pulse hit 120 beats per minute. The lights flickered faster now, creating a strobe effect that made everything look like a nightmare film reel. That's when we heard the second sound. It came from the drill hole itself, a low resonant tone that seemed to rise from the depths. Not mechanical, not natural. Something between a whale song and a tuning fork, vibrating through the ice and into our bones. Alexei's radio equipment went haywire, speakers squealing with feedback. Emergency lights on our generators began flashing red. The temperature gauge on Victor's equipment showed the ambient air warming by 2 degrees in 30 seconds. We're leaving, I said, but my voice sounded strange in the charged air. Now. Victor was staring down the drill hole, mesmerized by the sounds emerging from below. It's trying to communicate. It's trying to wake up, Alexei corrected, unplugging his radio with shaking hands. And we're not going to be here when it does. The pulse reached 140 beats per minute. Something was rising. We moved our camp 200 meters northeast, far enough to satisfy the Phantom Protocol, but close enough to maintain visual contact with the drilling site. Victor grumbled the entire time, dragging equipment through knee-deep snow while the floodlights continued their rhythmic dance in the distance. The pulse had stabilized at 160 beats per minute. Whatever was down there had found its rhythm and settled into it, like a runner hitting their stride. Alexei rigged up a monitoring station using his portable equipment, jury-rigging antennas to track electromagnetic fluctuations from the anomaly. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years making Soviet electronics work beyond their intended specifications. Signal strength is increasing, he reported, adjusting dials on his improvised setup. Whatever's generating this field, it's getting stronger. Victor kicked at the snow, building a windbreak around our new camp. How much stronger? When we first detected it, the electromagnetic signature was barely registering. Now it's strong enough to interfere with radio communications across multiple frequencies. Alexei paused, listening to his headphones. And there's something else. I'm picking up structured transmissions. I looked up from securing our shelter. Structured how? Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci series, basic geometric calculations. It's broadcasting them on rotating frequencies, cycling through the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Victor stopped working, cigarette frozen halfway to his lips. You're saying that thing is doing math? Advanced math, calculus-level equations, some I don't even recognize. Alexei's voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. This isn't random electromagnetic noise, comrades. This is communication. The radio crackled again with that same official voice. Protocol 11 Addendum. Teams observing anomalous activity must maintain detailed logs of all phenomena. Document transmission patterns, electromagnetic fluctuations, and any attempts at structured communication. Under no circumstances should personnel respond to mathematical sequences or attempt to establish bidirectional contact. There it is again, Victor muttered. Someone knows exactly what we're dealing with. I started thinking about the implications. If Moscow had protocols for this specific situation, it meant they'd encountered similar anomalies before. The Soviet Union covered 11 time zones and contained vast unexplored territories. How many other drilling teams had found objects like this? Alexei, can you trace the origin of those protocol transmissions? He fiddled with his equipment, tracking signal direction. Southeast, definitely Magadan region. But the transmission pattern is odd. It's being relayed through multiple stations, bouncing around the network like they're trying to obscure the original source. The temperature was dropping fast now that the sun had disappeared behind the mountains. Victor finished building our windbreak and started the portable heater, creating a small bubble of warmth in the endless cold. We settled into our temporary shelter, watching the distant drilling site through binoculars. That's when the lights went out. Not our lights, the floodlights at the drilling site. They died all at once, plunging the excavation into absolute darkness. The generator was still running. We could hear its distant rumble across the snow, but every bulb had failed simultaneously. Equipment malfunction, Victor suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Alexei checked his instruments. Electromagnetic signature just spiked. Whatever caused that pulse knocked out every light fixture within a 200-meter radius of the drill site. In the darkness where our lights had been, something was glowing. It started as a faint luminescence emanating from the drill hole itself, barely visible against the snow. But as we watched, the glow intensified, casting an eerie blue-green radiance across the excavation site. The light pulsed in rhythm with the electromagnetic transmissions, 160 beats per minute, steady as a metronome. Jesus Christ, Victor whispered. The radio burst to life with a new transmission, different voice, more urgent. All teams, this is Emergency Protocol 12. If anomaly exhibits bioluminescent activity, evacuate immediately to minimum distance of 1 kilometer. Repeat. Evacuate to 1 kilometer minimum distance. Do not observe bioluminescent displays for extended periods. Do not attempt to record or photograph luminescent phenomena. Victor was already moving, stuffing equipment into packs. 1 kilometer. They want us 1 kilometer away. But I was transfixed by the sight. The glow wasn't random, it was moving, flowing across the surface of the snow in deliberate patterns. Geometric shapes appeared and dissolved, mathematical forms drawn in living light across the frozen landscape. Dmitri, Alexei grabbed my shoulder, we need to move. Now. The patterns were hypnotic, beautiful in a way that made my eyes water. Spirals and fractals bloomed from the drill hole, expanding outward like slow-motion fireworks. Each shape was perfect, precise, following mathematical principles that spoke to something deep in my brain. It's trying to teach us, I said, unable to look away. The mathematical sequences, the light patterns. It's educational. Victor slapped me hard across the face. The shock broke my fascination, and suddenly I could think clearly again. What the hell were you doing? I don't know, I couldn't stop watching. Alexei was packing his radio equipment with frantic efficiency. The transmission warned against observing the lights for extended periods. Maybe there's a reason for that. We grabbed our essential gear and started moving away from the anomaly. Behind us, the light show continued, painting impossible mathematics across the Siberian landscape. Each step away from the site felt like fighting against a physical force, as if the thing in the ice was trying to pull us back. At 500 meters distance, Alexei's radio crackled with another transmission. Protocol 12 implementation requires immediate medical evaluation of all personnel exposed to bioluminescent displays. Report symptoms including disorientation, mathematical obsession, recurring geometric visualizations, and compulsive behavior patterns. Mathematical obsession, Victor repeated, like standing there staring at pretty lights while ignoring evacuation orders. I didn't answer. My mind was still processing what I'd seen, the perfect spirals, the elegant equations written in light. Part of me wanted to go back, to study the patterns more closely, to understand what the thing was trying to teach us. At 800 meters, we could still see the glow through our binoculars. The light patterns had grown more complex, filling the entire drilling site with flowing geometric displays. It was beautiful, mesmerizing. Dmitri. Alexei's voice seemed to come from very far away. Stop looking at it. I realized I'd been staring through the binoculars for several minutes, watching the mathematics dance across the snow. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. At 1 kilometer distance, we established our second camp. The glow was still visible on the horizon, a strange aurora painting the southern sky. Alexei rigged up his monitoring equipment again, tracking electromagnetic signatures from our new position. It's still transmitting, he reported. The mathematical sequences are getting more complex. Quantum mechanics equations now, theoretical physics I haven't seen since university. Victor built another windbreak, muttering curses in 3 languages. How long do we wait out here? Until that thing decides to stop doing math homework. The radio provided our answer. Protocol 12 duration, minimum 72 hours observation period required. Teams must document all activity while maintaining safe distance. Warning, anomaly exhibits increased activity during night cycle. Expect escalation. 72 hours. 3 days in the Siberian wilderness, watching something that could influence human behavior from a kilometer away. As if responding to the protocol transmission, the glow on the horizon intensified. The pulse rate increased again, 180 beats per minute now. Whatever was buried in that ice, it was just getting started. The first night was when we discovered the thing could dream. Alexei noticed it around midnight, monitoring his equipment by the dim glow of our battery-powered lantern. The electromagnetic transmissions had shifted from mathematical sequences to something else entirely. Complex wave patterns that resembled neural activity. It's like looking at brain waves, he said, showing me the oscilloscope readout. Alpha waves, theta waves, the whole spectrum, but scaled up to massive proportions. Victor was trying to sleep, wrapped in his military surplus sleeping bag and muttering complaints about the cold. The temperature had dropped to minus 38 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Our breath formed ice crystals that fell like snow inside our makeshift shelter. Brainwaves from what? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Something with a cranial capacity roughly the size of a football stadium. The glow on the horizon had changed during the night cycle, shifting from blue-green to deep violet. The light patterns were different too, less geometric, more organic. Flowing movements that reminded me uncomfortably of neural networks firing in slow motion. Victor sat up in his sleeping bag, eyes wide. Did you hear that? We listened. Wind across the snow, the distant hum of our generator. Nothing else. Hear what? Alexei asked. Voices, speaking Russian, but... Victor paused, struggling to articulate something. The words were backwards, like someone playing a recording in reverse. I hadn't heard anything, but the look on Victor's face made my stomach clench. He was the most pragmatic among us, the least likely to imagine things. If Victor was hearing voices, Something was affecting his perception. The radio crackled. Protocol 12 Night Cycle Addendum. Personnel may experience auditory hallucinations, time displacement sensation, and memory fragmentation. Symptoms are temporary, but may persist for several hours post-exposure. Do not attempt to interpret backwards speech patterns. Backwards speech, Victor repeated. They know about the backwards speech. Alexei checked his watch. It's been transmitting these neural patterns for 3 hours. If it's affecting you already. I'm fine, Victor insisted, but his hands were shaking as he lit another cigarette. Just need some nicotine. The glow intensified suddenly, casting violet shadows across our camp. Through my binoculars, I could see the drilling site clearly despite the distance. The light was no longer emerging from just the drill hole. It was rising from the entire excavation area as if something massive was pressing against the ice from below. That's when I saw the first crack. A thin line of violet light appeared in the permafrost, extending outward from the drill site like a spoke on a wheel. Then another, and another. Within minutes, a spider web of luminous fractures covered an area the size of a football field. Alexei, are you recording this? Every electromagnetic signature, every visual phenomenon. He adjusted his equipment, tracking multiple readings simultaneously. The neural patterns are intensifying. Whatever's dreaming down there, it's having vivid dreams. Victor was smoking his cigarette with mechanical precision, each drag exactly timed, each exhale carefully controlled. The voices are getting clearer, he said. They're discussing excavation protocols, different protocols than the ones we've been hearing. What kind of protocols? Integration procedures, adaptation sequences, something about neural mapping and consciousness transfer. Victor's voice was flat, emotionless. They're speaking in past tense, like they're describing something that already happened. The cracks in the ice were spreading, creating geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Not the elegant mathematics from earlier. These were jagged, chaotic, wrong somehow. Like someone had tried to solve an equation and made critical errors in the calculation. Alexei's radio burst into static, then cleared to reveal a new transmission. Protocol 13 activation criteria met. Subsurface pressure readings indicate structural compromise imminent. All observation teams implement immediate fallback to secondary positions. Secondary positions? I grabbed the radio. What secondary positions? Nobody told us about secondary positions. The transmission continued. Secondary observation posts located 5 kilometers from initial contact site. Automated monitoring equipment deployed at perimeter stations. Human personnel to maintain minimum contact with automated systems during final phase. Victor stood up, still smoking with that same mechanical rhythm. They've been planning this for a long time. The automated equipment, the secondary positions. This isn't the first time they've dealt with something like this. 5 kilometers. They wanted us 5 kilometers away from whatever was happening at the drill site. I looked through my binoculars again and understood why. The cracks in the ice were widening, revealing glimpses of something metallic beneath the surface. Something smooth and curved, reflecting the violet light in impossible ways. Pack everything, I ordered. We're moving again. But Victor wasn't listening. He was staring toward the drilling site with that same vacant expression I'd worn earlier while watching the light patterns. It's not just dreaming, he said. It's remembering. Remembering what? The others. The crews that came before us. It remembers all of them. Alexei grabbed Victor's shoulder, shaking him roughly. Victor, we need to move, now. Victor's cigarette had burned down to his fingers, but he didn't seem to notice. 12 previous excavations, 67 personnel total. They're all still down there, in a way. Their memories, their knowledge integrated into the neural matrix. The radio transmission became urgent. Protocol 13 emergency implementation. All personnel experiencing memory integration symptoms must evacuate immediately. Exposure to neural mapping procedures can result in permanent consciousness displacement. Memory integration. Consciousness displacement. The Soviet bureaucrats had clinical terms for everything, even losing your mind to whatever was buried in the ice. Victor dropped his cigarette and started walking toward the drilling site. "Victor, stop!" I caught up with him, grabbed his arm. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were wrong. Still Victor's eyes, but with something else looking out through them. Something ancient and patient and utterly alien. "Hello, Dmitri," he said in Victor's voice, but the cadence was different. More formal, like someone translating from another language. "Thank you for freeing us from the ice." Alexei was behind us now, radio equipment forgotten. "That's not Victor anymore." "I am Victor," the thing wearing Victor's face replied. "I am also Geological Survey Team 3 and Mineral Extraction Unit 7 and Arctic Research Division 12. We are many, but we are one." The cracks in the ice had become chasms now, revealing glimpses of a vast metallic hull buried beneath the permafrost. Not a geological formation at all, but something constructed, something designed by intelligence that had nothing to do with Earth, a ship. Victor's body turned back toward the excavation site, and I could see the violet light reflecting in his eyes. The ship has been waiting for so long, waiting for someone to dig deep enough, to listen carefully enough, to understand. "Understand what?" Alexei asked, though I could tell he was preparing to run. "That we never intended to be buried here. We crashed. Our navigation systems failed during what you would call the Pleistocene epoch. We have been in emergency hibernation for 11,743 of your years. 11,000 years, before human civilization, before agriculture, before anything resembling modern society. This thing had been sleeping beneath the ice since the last glacial period." "The previous excavation teams," I said. "What happened to them?" Victor's face smiled, but it wasn't Victor's smile. "They volunteered to help repair our navigation systems. Their neural patterns contained valuable information about your planet's current state. We needed to understand how much your species had developed. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. The Soviet government hadn't just encountered objects like this before. They'd been feeding people to them. Geological survey teams, mineral extraction units, research divisions, all sacrificed to gather intelligence about whatever was buried in the permafrost." "The evacuation protocols," Alexei said, "they're not meant to protect us. They're meant to deliver us at the right distance, the right time." Victor nodded. "Your government has been most cooperative. They understand the value of technological exchange." The violet light from the excavation site was growing brighter, and I could see more of the ship now. It was massive, easily a kilometer long, its hull covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. The neural patterns Alexei had detected weren't dreams, they were startup sequences. The ship was powering up its systems after 11 millennia of hibernation. "We require 3 more neural patterns to complete our navigation repairs," Victor said conversationally. "Your government promised us 3 more volunteers." 3, Dmitri, Victor, and Alexei. The perfect number for Protocol 13's final phase. Victor started walking toward the ship again, and this time I didn't try to stop him. Alexei and I watched as he moved across the snow with inhuman precision, his gait shifting from Victor's familiar lumber to something more graceful, more purposeful. Behind us, our radio crackled one final time. "Protocol 13 final phase initiated. Remaining personnel will proceed to integration point for voluntary neural mapping. This completes Survey Team 7's mission parameters." Voluntary. As if we had a choice. The ship was calling to us now, its violet light pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Mathematical equations flowed across its hull like living text, teaching lessons about physics and engineering that human science wouldn't discover for centuries. It was beautiful, educational, irresistible. I started walking toward the light. Alexei tackled me from behind, sending us both sprawling into the snow. The impact broke whatever hold the ship had on my mind, and suddenly I could think clearly again. The violet light was still beautiful, still hypnotic, but I could resist its pull. "Dmitri, damn it, fight it!" Alexei was shouting, though his voice seemed muffled by the electromagnetic interference crackling around us. "The neural mapping, it's not voluntary if they can control your mind." I rolled over in the snow, gasping. Victor was almost halfway to the ship now, walking with that same mechanical precision. Around the excavation site, I could see other figures emerging from the ice. Previous victims, their bodies preserved by the permafrost, now animated by the alien intelligence. They moved in perfect synchronization, a dozen men in Soviet drilling uniforms forming a reception committee for the newcomers. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, spitting snow from my mouth. Alexei was frantically adjusting his radio equipment, trying to establish contact with Susuman base. The first Protocol 11 transmission mentioned survey teams 7 through 15. That's at least 9 teams before us, maybe more. 9 teams, 30 to 40 men fed to this thing over the course of years or decades. The Soviet mining program had been systematically locating and excavating these ships across Siberia, trading human lives for alien technology. There, Alexei managed to tune in a weak signal from Susuman. "Susuman base, this is Survey Team 7. We have a code red situation at excavation site." Static answered him, then a familiar voice. "Survey Team 7, this is Base Commander Gromov. Please confirm your status and current distance from anomaly." 2 kilometers and retreating, Alexei lied. "The electromagnetic interference is affecting our equipment. We need immediate evacuation." A pause, then, "Negative, Survey Team 7. You are to proceed to integration point as scheduled. Protocol 13 is now in effect." Integration point. They weren't even pretending it was an evacuation anymore. "Gromov," I grabbed the radio. "This is Dmitry Volkov. I know what you're doing. I know about the other teams." Another pause, longer this time. When Gromov's voice came back, it was different, harder, more official. "Comrade Volkov, you are experiencing the disorientation effects documented in previous integration procedures. Please proceed to the ship for medical assistance." Medical assistance. Soviet euphemisms never failed to amaze me. Victor had reached the excavation site now, where the other figures waited. I watched through binoculars as they surrounded him, their movements coordinated like a ritual dance. Victor stood motionless in the center while they arranged themselves in geometric patterns around him. That's when the ship began to rise. Not lifting out of the ice was lifting with it. The entire excavation site rose like a platform, revealing the true scope of what had been buried beneath the permafrost. The ship was massive, easily 2 kilometers long, its hull covered in those shifting symbols that hurt to look at directly. It wasn't emerging from the ground so much as the ground was becoming part of it, ice and soil flowing like liquid to accommodate its awakening. "Jesus Christ," Alexei whispered. The figures on the rising platform, Victor and the other preserved personnel, were no longer standing in formation. They were merging, their bodies dissolving into streams of light that flowed toward openings in the ship's hull. Not dying exactly, but transforming into something else. Something that could interface directly with alien technology. Gromov's voice crackled through the radio again. "Survey Team 7, you are now experiencing the final phase of the integration process. Please note that resistance will only prolong the neural mapping procedure." "How many ships are there?" I demanded. "How many teams have you fed to these things?" "The Kolyma Technological Exchange Program has been highly successful," Gromov replied, as if reading from a prepared statement. 17 excavation sites have yielded significant advances in materials science, energy production, and aerospace engineering. The volunteer crews have contributed invaluable service to the advancement of Soviet scientific capabilities. 17 sites, 17 alien ships scattered across the Siberian wilderness, and the Soviet government had been methodically digging them up, trading human consciousness for technology that would keep them competitive with the West. "You sold us," Alexei said into the radio. "You sold your own people to aliens." "You volunteered for geological survey duty." Gromov's voice had turned cold. "The parameters of that duty have simply been expanded." The ship was fully risen now, hovering 3 meters above the transformed landscape. Its hull pulsed with that same violet light, and I could see movement within the translucent sections. Not the crew members we'd lost, but something else. Something that had been waiting inside the ship for 11,000 years. The original inhabitants. They were tall, roughly humanoid, but stretched in proportions that suggested a different evolutionary path. Their skin was translucent, revealing complex internal structures that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. When they moved, it was with fluid grace that made human movement look clumsy by comparison. And they were looking at us. Even from 2 kilometers away, I could feel their attention like pressure against my skull. They were studying us, evaluating us, deciding whether we were suitable for whatever process had consumed Victor and the others. The neural patterns they collect, I said, understanding dawning. They're not just navigation data. They're trying to understand us. Alexei nodded grimly. 11,000 years ago, they crashed on a planet inhabited by primitive humans. Now they wake up to find those primitives have developed technology, civilization, weapons. They need to understand what we've become. The radio transmission changed again, this time broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Polymer exchange participants prepare for final integration sequence. Neural mapping will commence in 60 seconds. But we were 2 kilometers away. How could they? The answer came as a wave of violet light burst from the ship, racing across the snow toward our position. Not just light. Some kind of energy field that made the air itself glow. Where it passed, the landscape changed, becoming more geometric, more alien. The snow crystallized into perfect mathematical structures, and the very ground began to pulse with that familiar rhythm. "Run," Alexei said. We ran. Behind us, the energy wave continued its expansion, transforming everything it touched. I could hear our abandoned equipment crackling as it was absorbed into the alien field, metal components restructuring themselves according to foreign engineering principles. But we couldn't outrun light. The wave caught us after 30 seconds of desperate sprinting, washing over us like warm water. For a moment, I felt that same compulsion as before, the desire to turn around, to walk back to the ship, to volunteer for integration. But this time was different. Instead of fighting the compulsion, I tried to understand it. The aliens weren't just controlling our minds, they were studying them. Each time we resisted, each time we struggled against their influence, they learned more about human psychology and neural architecture. "Alexei," I gasped, still running. "They're not trying to capture us. They're trying to understand us. Every time we resist, we're teaching them how human minds work. So what do we do?" I looked back at the ship, now rising higher into the violet sky. The beings inside were clearly visible, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in what might have been communication. They had what they needed from Victor and the other teams: basic human neural architecture, technological capabilities, social structures. But they still needed to understand human unpredictability, human creativity, human capacity for self-sacrifice. "We give them something they don't expect," I said, pulling the emergency radio detonator from my pack. Standard equipment for geological survey teams, designed to trigger controlled explosions for seismic testing. But we'd left more than seismic charges at the drilling site. We'd left our entire supply of diesel fuel, our generator, and enough explosive materials to create a very large, very hot fire. "Dmitri, what are you doing?" "Teaching them about human stupidity," I said, and triggered the detonator. The explosion lit up the Siberian night like a small sun. The fireball rose 300 meters into the night sky, turning the Siberian darkness into orange daylight. The shockwave knocked us flat against the snow, and for several seconds all I could hear was ringing in my ears. When my vision cleared, I saw the alien ship reeling in the sky above the explosion, its smooth flight pattern disrupted for the first time since it had emerged from the ice. The beings inside were moving frantically now, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in rapid, chaotic sequences. Whatever they had expected from their human subjects, kamikaze explosions apparently weren't on the list. "You magnificent bastard," Alexei laughed, spitting snow and ash. "You actually surprised them." The ship's violet light flickered and dimmed, then blazed brighter than before. Through the translucent sections of its hull, I could see the aliens clustering around what looked like control interfaces, their elongated forms moving with sudden urgency. The mathematical displays on the ship's exterior had shifted from elegant equations to something that looked distinctly like error messages. Alexei's radio crackled back to life, but instead of Gromov's voice, we heard something else. Rapid-fire communication, in a language that sounded like crystal chimes and whale songs combined. The aliens were talking to each other, and their conversation was being broadcast on our emergency frequency. "They're debating," Alexei said, listening intently. "I can't understand the language, but the rhythm, the back and forth, it's definitely a debate." The ship descended slowly, hovering directly over the crater where our drilling equipment had been. Steam rose from the melted permafrost, carrying with it the acrid smell of burned diesel and something else. Ozone, like the aftermath of lightning strikes. That's when Gromov's voice returned to the radio, but it sounded different now. Strained, almost panicked. "Survey Team 7, you have disrupted a critical phase of the integration process. Return to the ship immediately for emergency neural reconstruction." Reconstruction, I grabbed the radio. What the hell does that mean? "The volunteer subjects require immediate medical intervention after the thermal disruption event. The ship's medical facilities can repair damage caused by the explosion." Alexei and I looked at each other. Victor and the other preserved personnel had been standing directly at ground zero when I triggered the detonator. If they had survived the blast, it would be because the aliens had somehow protected them during the integration process. But the ship's erratic behavior suggested otherwise. Through my binoculars, I could see movement in the crater, not the fluid coordination of before, but jerky, uncontrolled motion. The preserved figures were stumbling around the blast site like damaged automatons, their movements random and purposeless. The neural mapping, I realized. The explosion interrupted it while they were connected to the ship's systems. The aliens had been in the process of downloading human consciousness when 3 tons of diesel fuel exploded directly beneath their feet. Whatever they had been learning about human nature, the lesson had been cut off mid-transmission. The ship's communication shifted to our frequency again, but this time it was attempting to speak Russian. The words were mechanical, clearly translated by computer systems, rather than understood. Human subjects Dmitry Volkov and Alexei Kozlov. Approach vessel for completion of educational process. Previous neural samples require repair due to thermal interference. "Educational process," Alexei muttered. "That's what they call having their brains sucked out." The ship began moving toward us, no longer the graceful hovering of before, but a lurching, unsteady flight pattern. Whatever damage the explosion had caused, it had affected more than just the neural mapping procedure. "Gromov," I called into the radio, "how long has this been going on? How long have you been feeding people to these things?" Static answered me then. The Kolyma program began in 1962 with the discovery of Ship Alpha near Verkhoyansk. Initial contact protocols were established by the Academy of Sciences in collaboration with the Ministry of Defense. 1962, 25 years of trading human beings for alien technology. A quarter-century of carefully orchestrated expeditions, each one delivering fresh neural patterns to creatures that had been studying humanity since before recorded history. "Ship Alpha," Alexei repeated. "How many ships are there total?" Current inventory includes 23 active vessels across the Siberian Federal District. 7 additional sites show preliminary electromagnetic signatures consistent with buried craft. 30 potential ships scattered across the largest wilderness on Earth, each one containing aliens who had been observing human development for over a millennium, waiting for the right moment to emerge and make contact. But contact wasn't the right word. Harvesting was more accurate. The ship reached our position and settled onto the snow with surprising gentleness, considering its erratic flight pattern. Up close, its size was overwhelming. The nearest edge of the hull extended beyond our vision in both directions. The surface wasn't metal as I had assumed, but something organic, like crystallized bone that pulsed with internal light. An opening appeared in the hull, iris-shaped and lined with bioluminescent patterns. The light coming from within was warm, inviting, almost cozy compared to the harsh Siberian night. "Come on," I said to Alexei, "let's go meet our new friends." "Are you insane? They want to hollow out our brains and use them as navigation computers." They wanted to study us systematically, learn our psychological patterns through controlled observation. I stood up, brushing snow from my jacket. But we just taught them something they weren't expecting to learn. Now they're curious. The truth was more complicated than that. The explosion had damaged whatever process they used to extract and preserve human consciousness. Victor and the others were still moving around in the crater, but their behavior was erratic, confused. The aliens needed to understand what had gone wrong, and the only way to do that was to study intact human subjects. We were no longer test subjects, we were witnesses to a failed experiment. Think about it, I continued, walking toward the ship's entrance. They've been planning this contact for decades, maybe centuries. They've studied our technology, our social structures, our neural architecture, but they never accounted for human irrationality. For someone blowing up their own equipment just to spite the aliens trying to study them. Alexei followed reluctantly, keeping his radio equipment clutched against his chest. What makes you think they won't just kill us? Because they're scientists, not conquerors. They crashed here 11,000 years ago and have been trying to understand Earth's dominant species ever since. We just gave them a data point they've never encountered before. The ship's entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, easily 10 meters in diameter. As we approached, the bioluminescent patterns in the walls brightened, creating a tunnel of soft blue-green light that extended deep into the ship's interior. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not the sterile metallic odor I had expected, but something organic and earthy, like rich soil after rain. The walls themselves seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting in a slow rhythm that matched the ship's electromagnetic pulse. Biological technology, Alexei whispered. The entire ship is alive. We walked deeper into the tunnel, our footsteps silent on the soft, yielding floor. The passage branched and curved, leading us through what felt like the arteries of some vast organism. Occasionally, we passed chambers filled with complex equipment, or what I assumed was equipment. The devices looked more like organs than machines, pulsing with their own internal rhythms and connected by networks of translucent tubes. After several minutes of walking, we emerged into a massive chamber that must have been near the ship's center. The space was filled with a warm, amber light that came from everywhere and nowhere, revealing the true scope of the alien presence. There were dozens of them. The beings were arranged in concentric circles around a central platform, their elongated forms swaying gently as if moved by an unfelt breeze. Each one was unique, some taller, some broader, their translucent skin showing different patterns of internal structures. They weren't a uniform species, but something more like a collective, individuals who had been modified or evolved for specific purposes. At the center of the chamber, on the raised platform, stood Victor. But it wasn't Victor anymore. His body had been changed, stretched and translucent like the aliens around him. His skin glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns, and when he turned to look at us, his eyes held depths that human eyes were never meant to contain. "Hello, comrades," he said in Victor's voice, but the words carried harmonics that resonated in my bones. "Thank you for the valuable lesson." "What lesson?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "That humans will choose destruction over submission, that your species values freedom more than survival, that you would rather die as yourselves than live as something else." Victor's transformed face managed something like a smile. This was not in our behavioral models. Around the chamber, the aliens were making sounds, not words, but complex harmonies that might have been laughter or amazement or something entirely foreign to human emotion. They were comparing notes, sharing observations about what they had witnessed. "The other teams," Alexei said, "what happened to them?" "They cooperated, they submitted to neural mapping willingly, believing it would advance human scientific knowledge." Victor gestured to several of the transformed figures around the chamber. "They learned our history, our technology, our purpose, but they never challenged our assumptions about your species." I looked around at the faces of the other expedition members, now barely recognizable in their alien forms. They seemed content, peaceful even, as if they had found something they hadn't known they were looking for. "You're not invaders," I realized. "You're refugees." Victor nodded. Our homeworld was destroyed by environmental collapse 11,743 years ago. We have been searching for a suitable planet to rebuild our civilization. Earth showed promise, but we needed to understand the dominant species before attempting settlement. And now we have learned that humans cannot be easily controlled or predicted, that your species will choose chaos over order, destruction over transformation. Victor paused, and for a moment I heard something like regret in his voice. This makes peaceful coexistence complicated. The aliens around the chamber had begun moving, their harmonious sounds shifting to something more urgent. Decisions were being made, conclusions drawn from the data we had provided. "What happens now?" Alexei asked. Victor's glowing eyes met mine. "Now we leave. Earth is unsuitable for our purposes. Your species is too unpredictable, too willing to choose death over adaptation. We will search for another world, one inhabited by more cooperative beings." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a terrible understanding. They were leaving, yes, but they weren't leaving empty-handed. 23 ships across Siberia, each one containing preserved human neural patterns, a complete archive of human knowledge and behavior. "You're taking us with you," I said. "Not you, but the knowledge we have gathered, the neural patterns we have preserved, yes. These will help us understand other species we encounter, other worlds we might consider for settlement." Victor's transformed features showed something that might have been sympathy. "You have saved your planet, Dmitry Volkov, but you have doomed countless others." The ship began to move. The ship's ascent was gradual, almost gentle, but I could feel the acceleration in my bones as we rose through the Siberian atmosphere. Through the translucent walls, I watched the landscape shrink below us, the crater where our equipment had exploded, the scattered lights of Susuman Base in the distance, the endless expanse of snow and forest that had been our world for 2 months. Victor was explaining the departure process to the assembled aliens, his transformed voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ship's living walls. He spoke in their musical language now, but occasionally translated fragments for our benefit. "The fleet will rendezvous at the coordinates we established in 1962, he said. 23 vessels carrying complete behavioral archives of human civilization, enough data to predict and counter resistance patterns on any world inhabited by similar species." Similar species. How many worlds out there harbored beings like us, curious, stubborn, willing to fight against impossible odds? How many civilizations would the aliens encounter and destroy using the knowledge they'd harvested from decades of Soviet collaboration? Alexei was recording everything on his portable equipment, though I doubted the recordings would survive whatever the aliens had planned for us. "Victor, how many people know about this program? How far up does it go?" Victor's glowing eyes fixed on us with alien patience. "The Politburo has been briefed since 1964. The technology transfers have been substantial. Advances in metallurgy, energy production, aerospace engineering. Your space program, your nuclear capabilities, your computer systems, all enhanced by our technical guidance." The implications were staggering. The Soviet Union's rapid technological advancement during the Cold War hadn't been the result of human ingenuity alone. It had been purchased with human lives, traded for alien knowledge that had helped Moscow compete with the West. "The Americans," I said, "do they know?" "The Americans have their own arrangements. Different species, different methodologies. The beings they contact prefer direct technological exchange rather than neural harvesting." Victor paused, something like amusement flickering in his transformed features. "Americans are more willing to cooperate when offered material benefits." So it wasn't just the Soviets. The entire Cold War had been influenced by alien contact, both superpowers trading with different extraterrestrial species for competitive advantages. The space race, the nuclear arms race, the technological explosion of the 20th century, all of it contaminated by deals made with beings who saw humanity as test subjects. Through the ship's walls, I could see other lights rising from the Siberian landscape, distant points of violet radiance ascending into the night sky, each one marking another alien vessel beginning its departure. 23 ships spread across thousands of kilometers of wilderness, all lifting off simultaneously. The coordination, Alexei observed, watching the distant lights. This evacuation was planned long in advance. We have been preparing for departure since your species demonstrated nuclear weapons capability, Victor explained. The risk of global conflict made Earth unsuitable for long-term habitation. We decided to harvest what data we could and move on to more stable worlds. The ship was accelerating now, the curvature of Earth becoming visible beyond the horizon. The other alien vessels were converging on our position, their lights growing brighter as they approached. Soon we would be part of a fleet carrying the accumulated knowledge of human civilization to worlds we would never see. The other expedition members, I said, looking around the chamber at the transformed figures. Do they remember who they were? They remember everything, Victor replied. Their human memories, their personalities, their individual quirks and preferences. But they also understand their greater purpose now. They are part of something larger than themselves. One of the transformed figures approached us. I recognized him as Sergei Morozov from Geological Survey Team 3, though his features had been stretched and modified beyond easy recognition. When he spoke, his voice carried the same harmonic distortions as Victor's. Dmitri, he said, using my name with careful precision. I want you to know that the transition is not painful. The neural integration process preserves consciousness while expanding awareness. You will still be yourself, but you will also be part of our collective understanding. We're not volunteering, Alexei said firmly. The volunteer status is no longer relevant, Sergei replied. You have provided valuable behavioral data simply by being here. Your resistance patterns, your decision-making processes, your willingness to sacrifice equipment and potentially lives to prevent our study. All of this information is now part of our database. The terrible truth was becoming clear. We hadn't escaped or outsmarted the aliens. We had played directly into their hands, providing them with exactly the kind of unpredictable human behavior they needed to study. Our explosion, our resistance, our desperate attempts to understand their plans, all of it had been educational. Victor gestured toward the ship's central platform, where complex biological machinery was beginning to unfold. The neural mapping process has been refined since our initial attempts. The thermal disruption you caused taught us to isolate individual consciousness patterns more effectively. You will experience no memory loss, no personality dissolution. Just the loss of our humanity, I said. Humanity is a limited perspective, Victor replied. You will gain access to the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that has existed for 40,000 years. You will understand physics and mathematics beyond your current comprehension. You will see the universe as it truly is, not filtered through the narrow perceptions of a single species. The offer was seductive, I had to admit. The chance to understand technologies that could transform Earth, to see the cosmos through the eyes of beings who had traveled between stars for millennia. But the price was everything that made us human. Our independence, our capacity for irrational choice, our fundamental unpredictability. Around the chamber, more of the transformed expedition members were gathering, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in synchronized rhythms. They looked peaceful, content, as if they had found answers to questions they hadn't known they were asking. The previous teams embraced the transition, Sergei explained, noticing my observation. They understood that cooperation would benefit both species, but your resistance has taught us that not all humans can be easily integrated. Some will require more comprehensive neural restructuring. Comprehensive neural restructuring. Soviet euphemisms were bad enough, but alien euphemisms were genuinely terrifying. The ship shuddered slightly as it achieved orbital velocity, and through the translucent walls, I could see the full scope of the alien fleet. 23 vessels of various sizes and configurations, each one carrying decades of accumulated human knowledge. The largest ships were easily 10 kilometers long, while the smallest, like the one we were aboard, were merely 2 or 3 kilometers in length. Each ship specializes in different aspects of study, Victor explained, following my gaze. Psychological analysis, technological assessment, cultural documentation, biological sampling. The fleet represents the most comprehensive study of an alien species in our recorded history. How many species have you studied? Alexei asked. 47 confirmed intelligent species across 12 star systems, Victor replied without hesitation. 23 successful integrations, 19 failed contact attempts, 5 species that proved unsuitable for coexistence. 5 species that proved unsuitable. I wondered what had happened to them, whether their worlds had been left alone or marked for some other fate. The biological machinery at the chamber's center had fully deployed now, revealing a complex array of neural interfaces and consciousness transfer equipment. The devices looked less like technology and more like evolved organs, pulsing with their own internal rhythms and connected by networks of translucent tubes. The process begins with memory extraction, Victor continued, apparently determined to explain every detail of our impending transformation. Your personal experiences, your education, your emotional responses, all catalogued and preserved. Then we map your decision-making patterns, your logical frameworks, your creative processes. And then, I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Then we integrate your consciousness into our collective network. You will retain your individual identity while gaining access to our shared knowledge base. You will be yourself, but you will also be us. The perfect compromise between preservation and assimilation. We would survive in a sense, but we would never again be truly human. Alexei was still recording, his equipment somehow functioning despite the alien technology surrounding us. For the record, he said into his microphone, we are approximately 200 kilometers above Earth aboard an alien vessel. The time is 0347 hours local. We are about to undergo forced neural integration with a species that has been secretly studying humanity for 25 years. The record will be preserved, Victor assured him. Your final human thoughts will become part of our historical archive. Through the ship's walls, Earth was shrinking to a blue marble against the starfield. Somewhere below, the Soviet government was probably scrambling to explain the disappearance of 23 alien vessels from their territory. Or perhaps they had expected this, planned for it, accepted it as the inevitable conclusion of their bargain with beings from another star. The neural integration machinery began to emit a low, harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in my skull. Around the chamber, the transformed expedition members were arranging themselves in specific positions, their bioluminescent patterns synchronizing with the ship's systems. One final question, I said to Victor. If you learned that humans are too unpredictable for peaceful coexistence, why are you taking us with you? Victor's transformed features showed something that might have been regret. Because the universe is vast, Dmitri, and there are many worlds where unpredictability is not a survival trait, but a liability. Your species' knowledge will help us identify and prepare for resistance patterns on planets inhabited by beings more manageable than humans. The horrible understanding crashed over me like a cold wave. They weren't just taking human knowledge to study other species. They were taking it to conquer them. Our resistance patterns, our psychological profiles, our capacity for irrational choice would be used as a template for breaking the will of beings who might otherwise fight back against alien colonization. We had saved Earth by proving humanity was too dangerous to rule, but we had doomed countless other worlds in the process. The neural interface resembled a crystalline web that descended from the chamber's ceiling, its translucent strands pulsing with the same bioluminescent patterns as the ship's walls. As it approached, I could feel something tugging at the edges of my consciousness, not painful, but wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. The initial contact feels unusual, Victor said, his transformed voice carrying what might have been sympathy. Your neural pathways are more resistant than previous subjects. The explosion may have caused temporary electromagnetic scarring. Electromagnetic scarring. Even transformed into an alien hybrid, Victor couldn't abandon his geological terminology. Alexei was backing away from the descending interface, clutching his recording equipment like a shield. Wait, before you hollow out our brains, I want to know something. Where are you going? What world are you planning to conquer with our knowledge? The aliens around the chamber exchanged those harmonic sounds that might have been communication or amusement. Victor's glowing eyes focused on something beyond the ship's walls, where the star field stretched into infinity. Kepler 442b, he said, a planet orbiting a red dwarf star, approximately 1,200 light-years from Earth. Our long-range surveys detected signs of industrial civilization, radio emissions, atmospheric pollutants, orbital debris, a species roughly equivalent to your early 20th century technological level. 1,200 light-years. At the speed the alien ships could travel, judging by how quickly we'd achieved orbit, the journey would take perhaps a few decades, long enough to analyze and catalogue the human neural patterns they'd collected, to develop specific strategies for dealing with the beings they'd encounter. They won't have nuclear weapons, I realized. No mutually assured destruction to make conquest too risky. Precisely, a civilization advanced enough to be useful, but not advanced enough to pose a meaningful threat. Victor gestured toward the neural interface, which had paused its descent a few meters above our heads. Their behavioral patterns will likely share similarities with human psychology, territorial aggression, resource competition, hierarchical social structures. Your resistance data will be invaluable for predicting and countering their defensive responses. The scope of it was breathtaking in its callousness. An entire civilization, billions of beings who had never heard of Earth or humanity, marked for conquest because we had taught the aliens how to break intelligent species that fought back. Alexei raised his recording equipment, speaking directly into the microphone. This is Survey Team 7, final log entry. The alien fleet is departing for Kepler 442b with complete behavioral profiles of human civilization. They will use this data to conquer a species that has no idea what's coming. If anyone finds this recording, if humanity survives what we've done, find a way to warn them. The warning will never reach them, Victor said with alien patience. Radio signals travel at light speed. Our ships travel much faster. By the time any message from Earth could reach Kepler 442b, the integration process will be complete. The neural interface resumed its descent, its crystalline strands beginning to separate and orient toward our heads. I could feel its proximity like static electricity, making the hair on my arms stand up and setting my teeth on edge. That's when Alexei did something unexpected. Instead of fleeing or submitting, he began dismantling his radio equipment with swift, practiced movements. Components scattered across the chamber floor, circuit boards, vacuum tubes, copper wiring, batteries. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Building a bomb," he replied calmly, connecting wires to the equipment's power supply. "Not to escape. We're stuck here until this thing lands. But maybe I can damage their neural archives, corrupt some of the data they've collected." The aliens around the chamber began moving with sudden urgency, their harmonic communications shifting to sharp, discordant tones. Victor stepped forward, his transformed features showing something like alarm. "Alexei, the neural patterns we've preserved represent decades of research. Destroying them would accomplish nothing except maybe some other species gets to live free for a few more years while you figure out new ways to break their minds." Alexei was working faster now, his hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years maintaining Soviet radio equipment in impossible conditions. "Dmitri, remember what you said about teaching them human unpredictability?" The neural interface was trying to lock onto our positions, its strands weaving through the air like blind snakes seeking prey. But the electromagnetic interference from Alexei's improvised device was causing problems. The crystalline filaments jerked and twitched, unable to establish stable connections. Victor was speaking rapidly in the alien language now, his words carrying harmonics of urgency and frustration. Around the chamber, other transformed figures were approaching, their movements coordinated like a military formation. They weren't going to let us disrupt their precious archives. "How long do we have?" I asked, grabbing loose components and helping Alexei with his assembly. "Maybe 30 seconds before they overwhelm us. But if I can overload the power supply, create enough electromagnetic interference." He connected the final wire, and his makeshift device began emitting a high-pitched whine that made the ship's walls pulse erratically. The effect was immediate. The neural interface recoiled as if burned, its crystalline strands dissolving back into the ceiling. Around the chamber, The transformed expedition members staggered as their bioluminescent patterns flickered and dimmed. Even Victor stumbled, his alien grace disrupted by whatever feedback was coursing through the ship's living systems. But the real effect was deeper than that. Through the translucent walls, I could see other ships in the fleet beginning to drift, their perfect formation breaking apart as their navigation systems struggled with the interference. Some vessels were firing thrusters in random directions, while others had gone completely dark. The ships are networked, I realized. They share consciousness across the entire fleet. Alexei nodded grimly, adjusting his device to increase the interference. And if one ship's systems get corrupted, it spreads to the others. Like a virus in a computer network, but for living spacecraft. The implications were staggering. The aliens had created a collective intelligence spanning dozens of vessels, sharing knowledge and coordinating their activities across vast distances. But that same connectivity made them vulnerable to systematic disruption. Victor was trying to speak, but his words came out as garbled harmonics, his consciousness apparently unable to process the electromagnetic chaos Alexei's device was generating. Around the chamber, other transformed figures were collapsing, their hybrid nervous systems overloaded by the feedback. "We need to get to the archive chambers," I said. "If we can physically damage their storage systems while their defenses are down." "No time," Alexei replied, his device sparking and smoking as it overloaded. "This thing will burn out in minutes, but maybe I can program a feedback loop, something that will keep cascading through their network even after we're gone." He was modifying his equipment as he spoke, rewiring circuits and rerouting power flows with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew this was his last chance to matter. The electromagnetic interference was getting stronger, causing the ship's bioluminescent systems to flicker like a dying campfire. Through the walls, I could see the fleet in chaos. Several ships had collided, their hulls merging in ways that suggested they were more liquid than solid. Others were spinning out of control, their navigation systems completely compromised. The perfect coordination that had marked their departure was dissolving into electromagnetic pandemonium. "There," Alexei said, making a final connection. "Recursive feedback loop, designed to amplify and spread through any network system it encounters. Should keep corrupting their archives for weeks, maybe months." The device was glowing white-hot now, its improvised circuits barely containing the energy Alexei had forced through them. In seconds, it would explode, but the damage was already done. The feedback loop was propagating through the ship's systems, carrying electromagnetic chaos to every connected vessel in the fleet. Victor managed to speak, his transformed voice breaking into fragments. "You have corrupted 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge, the archive, irreplaceable." "Good," Alexei said simply. The device exploded. The blast wasn't large, just enough to scatter components across the chamber floor, but the electromagnetic pulse it generated was massive. Every bioluminescent system in the ship died simultaneously, plunging us into absolute darkness. The harmonic vibrations that had resonated through the hull went silent. Even the artificial gravity fluctuated, making us float for several weightless seconds before slamming back to the floor. When emergency lighting finally flickered to life, the scene had changed dramatically. The transformed expedition members were lying motionless on the chamber floor, their hybrid forms reverting to something more recognizably human. Victor's elongated features were contracting, his translucent skin becoming opaque again, but he was still breathing. "Dmitri," he whispered, his voice purely human for the first time since his transformation. "What did you do?" "We broke their toys," I said, helping him sit up. "All of them." Through the ship's walls, now opaque rather than translucent, I could hear sounds of structural failure, metal groaning, atmosphere hissing through ruptures, the distant rumble of explosion as other vessels in the fleet suffered catastrophic system failures. "The neural archives," Victor said, his eyes focusing with human awareness. "If they're corrupted, if the data is lost, then maybe the beings on Kepler 442b get to stay free," I finished. "Maybe they get to make their own mistakes instead of being conquered by ours." Victor smiled, a purely human expression on a face that was still slightly wrong in its proportions. "You magnificent bastards. You actually did it." But even as we celebrated our small victory, I could feel the ship beginning to fall. The ship hit the permafrost at terminal velocity, ploughing through 3 kilometers of tundra before coming to rest in a crater that would puzzle geologists for decades. By the time the rescue helicopters arrived, the hull had already begun dissolving, its biological components breaking down into organic compounds that would enrich the Siberian soil for generations. They found us in the wreckage, barely alive but recognizably human. Victor's transformation had reversed completely during the crash, leaving him with nothing but fragmented memories of collective consciousness and a persistent ability to solve complex mathematical equations in his head. The doctors at the military hospital in Novosibirsk attributed his enhanced cognitive abilities to head trauma and electromagnetic exposure. Alexei never spoke again. The feedback loop that had destroyed the alien archives had burned out something essential in his brain, leaving him able to understand everything, but unable to communicate beyond simple gestures. He spent his remaining years in a special facility outside Moscow, building increasingly complex radio devices that served no apparent purpose except to generate specific patterns of electromagnetic interference. I told them everything, of course. The debriefing lasted 6 weeks, conducted by men in grey suits who took detailed notes and showed no surprise at any of my revelations. They knew about the ships, the technology transfers, the neural harvesting program. What they hadn't expected was the complete system failure that had crashed every alien vessel simultaneously across Siberian airspace. "Acceptable losses," one of the debriefers said when I asked about the other expedition teams. "The technological advances we gained from the program more than compensated for personnel expenditures." Personnel expenditures. They reduced Victor's friend from Survey Team 3 to a line item in a classified budget report. The official story was a massive meteor shower that had caused widespread electromagnetic anomalies across the Kolyma region. Cleanup crews spent months scouring crash sites, collecting alien technology that would be reverse-engineered in secret laboratories. The biological matter was shipped to research facilities, where scientists would spend decades trying to understand how to grow machines from living tissue. But they never managed to reconstruct the neural archives. Alexei's feedback virus had corrupted not just the data storage systems, but the fundamental biological processes that maintained the information. 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge from dozens of species simply dissolved. Like trying to remember a dream after waking, the harder they tried to recover the data, the more fragmented it became. The Soviet Union collapsed 4 years later, and the alien technology program was quietly absorbed into various international black projects. Some of the recovered devices eventually found their way into civilian applications. More efficient computer processors, advanced materials, improved power generation systems. Humanity's technological progress accelerated without anyone understanding why. I was given a commendation for heroic service and a job teaching geology at Moscow State University. The authorities made it clear that discussing my experiences with anyone outside official channels would result in permanent reassignment to a labor camp in Magadan. I taught mineralogy to undergraduate students and tried not to think about the fact that every satellite launch, every computer advancement, every leap forward in human technology was built on foundations purchased with human lives. But sometimes, late at night in my apartment overlooking the university campus, I would tune my radio to the frequencies Alexei had used for his interference device. Mostly I heard static, the normal electromagnetic background noise of a technological civilization. Occasionally, though, I picked up something else, faint signals from deep space, transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't have been able to penetrate Earth's atmosphere. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, basic geometric calculations. The same patterns the alien ship had broadcast during those final hours in Siberia. Other ships were out there, somewhere in the vast darkness between stars. Ships that had escaped our sabotage, carrying partial archives and fragmented memories of what they had learned about humanity. They were probably still searching for suitable worlds to colonize, still using whatever knowledge they had preserved to subjugate species that had never heard of Earth. We had saved our own planet by proving humans were too dangerous to rule. but we had also shown them that we were dangerous in ways they hadn't expected. Not just willing to fight, but willing to destroy ourselves to deny them victory. That kind of unpredictability made us valuable in a different way. Sometimes I wondered if other expeditions were still out there, on worlds we would never see, teaching aliens how to break the spirits of beings who shared our stubborn refusal to submit. Victor and Sergei and all the others, their neural patterns preserved in quantum storage systems, helping conquerors understand the psychology of resistance. The radio crackled with another burst of mathematical sequences, transmitted from somewhere beyond Neptune's orbit. I adjusted the frequency and listened to the alien equations describing trajectories and orbital mechanics, preparing for approaches to worlds that would never know what was coming. In the end, we had won everything and lost everything. Earth was free, the universe was not.